Hey, I just want to take an opportunity to shout out to my number one fan, my number one podcasting fan, or at least she claims she is, Alma. I want to say how much I really appreciate you listening to these podcasts and you sharing that with me. Because as a podcast host, sometimes we don't even know if anybody listens. But I tell you what, when you share that you listen to it and you appreciate it, that means a lot. So Alma, thank you much. I wanted to give you a shout out. Today, I'm interviewing fellow consultant Liz Wooten. I've known Liz for a number of years when she actually trained me on board governance, many years ago. She's an executive coach, she's a facilitator, a strategist, a thought leader, a speaker, a published author, and then these are the three things I love the most. She's a mom, a wife, and a yogi. And she also runs Connect for More, a consulting firm. So I hope you enjoy this interview as much as I did asking her the questions. Please welcome Liz Wooten. Hey, why don't we start off by telling the audience a little bit about yourself and how you came to be in the nonprofit space and such a successful consultant.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And thank you for having me, Michael. I'm really looking forward to this. So I started in the nonprofit sector probably, I won't say at birth, but pretty close thereafter. Philanthropy has been a really big part of my family for a very long time, but I officially became involved in the nonprofit sector when I was in graduate school at University of South Florida. And I was volunteering for an organization that I had a personal connection to because I couldn't help the family member that had the particular illness, and really felt empowered to join this organization and got into shortly thereafter into service in the fundraising and communications departments for a number of nonprofit organizations. Now, fast forward or rewind, depending on your timeline, to about 15 years ago, I was working for a nonprofit. And as things do in the nonprofit sector, it took a year. The recession in 2008 took a year to hit our particular nonprofit. So in 2009, my position was eliminated. I had a lot of great relationships with consultants and nonprofits throughout the community. Started the work in consulting and coaching in that space. And then throughout that, I've had a variety of experiences, including, as you referenced, certified governance trainer with Board Source. I've been a Dare to Lead certified facilitator with Dr. Brene Brown. And I'm currently working on my ACC credentialing with the International Coaching Federation.
Boy, that you are never bored, are you? You have always got something going on. It's something I've admired about you for years. You always have something going on. So let's dive a little bit into your practice. So you're currently focusing on helping leaders connect around impact, strategy, and vision. So leaders, impact, strategy, and vision. What does this mean? And when should an organization engage somebody like you to help them with these?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when you think about words like leadership and strategy and vision, a lot of them feel like fluff. So part of my mission in working with any nonprofit or corporate or entity is to really assess what are the issues at hand, what's getting in the way of you being the most successful. And part of that starts with self-assessment. So I always say if there's an organization that feels disconnected as a leadership team, and that includes board and staff, if there is somebody who is either rewriting or getting ready to revamp a strategic plan, that's an important time to engage with me. And then if you want to increase connection and courage and conversation in and around the leadership team, that's certainly another way to engage with me as well. But I always start off with the disclaimer that, I may be an expert in some things, governance, leadership, continual growth, but I am not an expert in the organizations that I work with. And I really lean and lean heavily in and ask a lot of questions through discovery and assessment of the board members, the staff members, and the volunteers to say, what does your expertise warrant? And what are the issues that you're seeing at your level that we can integrate and address together?
And so when you talk about communication at the senior levels and people needing help, are you seeing this to be an increasing opportunity for you? So there's a challenge, and what's driving it in the society?
It's interesting. I think my goal is always to meet an organization and their leaders where they're at. And so, a few years ago, as everyone is probably recognizing, we had a pandemic. And so there were a lot of things moving to virtual. And so a lot of my work at that time was how do we take a virtual environment and still keep or still craft a culture of connection and courage. And in that, we say the hard things, we discuss the hard things, and we move forward with consensus in a way that feels right for everyone. Lately, it's been really interesting. As you know, as a Floridian, we've had a number of storms in the last hurricane season that really just kind of knocked everybody around physically, mentally, emotionally. And so, I think as part of meeting people where they're at, it then comes into assessing, where is your leadership team at? Have you been able to rejuvenate your strategic plan post pandemic? If not, what are the things that are getting in the way of that? And really starting with that. What sometimes comes out of that is maybe there's a communication breakdown between board and staff. Maybe there's been a significant amount of turnover either on the board or within staff that has caused, I won't even say negative relationships, but anytime you introduce a new person into an environment, we have to do the due diligence to build that relationship. And sometimes when we're working really hard on our mission work, we're not always working on the internal relationships that make our mission work successful.
Oh, I think that's so well articulated. And so, who usually engages you? Is it the CEO, the executive director, or is it maybe a board chair?
So I'm going to give you my favorite consultant answer ever, which is it depends.
I love it.
The joke is always that that's my answer to many things, including to my children. It depends. Um, so what comes out of that is yes, absolutely. I'll be engaged by the chief executive officer. I actually just had today someone reach out, a board chair that I served on a board with years ago, to connect me to their CEO. And so at times I'm also working with specific departments. Perhaps it's the children's services team of an organization. Perhaps it's the senior leadership team. And it really just depends on who has been identified, if there's a standing relationship, or as you know, in this business, we get referrals from our colleagues and from funders. And so it's also about finding the fit. And I really enjoy the opportunity of working with any of those types of folks, but also determining, am I the right fit to work with you? Or, for example, should I introduce you to a Michael or to other folks in our community that can maybe be a better culture fit for you as well? So that's always been something that I enjoy, whether it's working with CEO or, a staff director or the board chair, or, and this is sometimes my favorite, admittedly, a governance chair or a development chair, somebody who's not quite at the top of the board leadership food chain, but is certainly making an impact in a really important way.
Oh, I like that. I know you always really put your clients number one and prospective clients. That's something that's always been noticeable. I've noticed about you over the years. So you introduced to me the concept of a co-op-itition. I can't even know if I can say it right. Co-op-itition. I loved that, especially in our space. Talk to the audience a little bit about it, why it's important, and why board members need to understand this.
Sure. So the concept of co-opetition, I as a former English teacher raised by an English teacher, I have to admit, that is not my word. It came from a retreat I did with a client who was a membership organization. And so we were talking about how do we embody community engagement, partnerships, and our kind of USO, right? Our unique service opportunities ahead. And that concept of co-opetition kept getting coined by this particular group, which was focused on tech and AI. And so we started to talk about this and kind of what it meant. But at its simplest form, co-opetition is really about acknowledging that you are not the only game in town, lovely nonprofit. And, as a founder, as, a business owner, it's really easy to get in your lane and stay in your lane. But I also think it's important to recognize that the rising tide really can lift all boats. If we can work together and identify partners that have opportunities where we maybe have specialty, we can partner together in a way that's meaningful. Now, I always say it depends on the trust that you can build with those folks. It also depends on if there's alignment and fit. But I think it doesn't look the same for every co-op. I even created a new word, a co-opetitious relationship. I can't take the English teacher out of my history for
No, I
sure, but
don't.
the co-opetitious piece about engaging at all levels, right? So I know your audience is mostly board members, and I think board members can open doors or make those introductions for those potential organizations so that we at the nonprofit organization we're serving can be better, right? I think anytime we're in a business, that continual improvement model is always important, but particularly when it comes to mission driven, making sure that we are looking around at the landscape in which we operate and identifying, are there folks that may be in a competitive space, but also we have some opportunity to partner with. And that's kind of the co-opetition in a nutshell.
Well, and it's so important in this industry and in this space, if you will. And that's one of the challenges as I work with boards, is especially people from the business sector really have a tough time grasping that it's okay to work with your competitors, which is an interesting term in and of itself. But if you're going to accomplish a mission in the nonprofit space, probably not going to be able to do it alone.
Right.
And there are benefits to working with others.
Yeah, that vacuum piece, just to say another part of it, we don't in the nonprofit community work in a vacuum, right? There are so many different elements that impact us. We are of the public good, and so the public has an interest just as a lot of other organizations. But on a small business side, I purposely build relationships with competitors who are both consultants and coaches like yourself, right? I think that's really important that we acknowledge that any entrepreneurial, innovative, kind of gritty organization really is building those relationships because as much as I would like to be, I am not the expert at everything and I'm not right for everyone either. And so I think we have to remember that at a nonprofit level too, that just because a donor isn't interested in us doesn't mean that we couldn't pass that donor on to a colleague or pass on a stellar board member that could also be of service in another similar mission area.
Oh, wise words. Almost blasphemous in some circles, right? But wise words, Liz.
There was some cringe I sensed on the other side of the microphone that people will have with that statement, but I'm happy to stand by it and back it up with research. So
There you go. Yep, I'm sure you've got it, and for the greater good, I like that. So you have a passion for helping leaders be successful, and it's part of your work. You're helping leaders. You talk about the heart work, the heart, HERT, heart work. Talk a little bit about the heart work and how you
Mhm.
incorporate that into your practice and how you help people with that.
Absolutely. Well, I'm often heard saying, Michael, that the heart work is the hardest work. And that soft skills are really the most necessary of all when we think about mission work. And so a lot of that, I of course try to do assessments with folks individually if we're working at a coaching level or even in a team environment to do some discovery with individual team members. But it's also about kind of recognizing that we are all coming to the table, figuratively or literal table, with some sense of history, some sense of lived experience, some, dare I say, baggage or narrative that we've told ourselves about the mission and the work ahead. And so for me, quite frankly, it took me kind of going through some lived experiences and going through we'll call it a breaking open process to say, I'm not as strong as I thought I was, or I'm not as strong as I thought I was alone, or, vulnerability can be a strength and empathy can be a strength. So I believe and continue to help work with our clients through whether it's a dare to lead training or a retreat where we're facilitating container building and connection, that we can uplift spirits and we can encourage hope, but we can also show up in our full, authentic, wholehearted, sometimes messy selves, so that we can show up and do the work ahead as ourselves, but also in connection with others.
Boy, I bet your clients appreciate that. Let me ask you this a question. Whenever I hear this, I'm a little bit old school. I'm older than you, and so back then leaders didn't show emotion, and
Mm.
now I know that's changed, and we've worked through that. But how do you encourage people to balance too much openness with this whole notion of vulnerability? I'm just curious. How do you balance that?
Oh, very carefully.
Ah,
There's a lot of research on vulnerability, and certainly, I have a mutual affinity for Dr. Brene Brown and her work on what she calls disclosure. So disclosure, I liken that to social media, right? Like all of the, oh, this happened with my son today. This is what's going, you were on this vacation. Like that is not vulnerability. That's just kind of oversharing. So,
well, oh, nice. Yeah.
so I think from that standpoint, I have to check of what is me sharing who I am versus what is sharing what I've done. And so for me personally, again, leading by example here, even in leading with clients, I as often as possible try to offer the grace and generosity that I can with their schedules, especially in the nonprofit sector, especially if it's not their day job, as many board members are, experiencing this as something else they're doing in addition to the work they've already committed to. So I think it's meeting people with generosity in that regards, but also kind of really defining the boundaries, right? Of for me, I also expect that if I have a kid that's sick, what do we do with that? And dear client, this is what's happening. So I think it's depending on the level of trust that you've built with the person, as far as how you can, and quite frankly, the organization, as far as how you can move into that. Um, but I really wholeheartedly believe it has to also be at your comfort level. So, as you know, I'm a consummate researcher and studier, and so I'm working through the integration right now of understanding more about trauma informed facilitation. So when you walk into a room with a group of people and you are a relative stranger, perhaps considered an expert, not requiring folks to just step up and step in because you say they should, but really asking them to bring to the table what they have to give today. And I think that's kind of always my rule of thumb is, even, and I'm sure this is going to be an interesting topic as well. But even in thinking about how I approach friends and colleagues about conversations about politics, asking, "Hey, would you mind having a conversation with me about the last election? I'm really curious about your beliefs." So it's I think approaching people, individually, but also allowing them, to have the day they have and to say, "Nope, not there yet," as we say in my family. I'm not there today.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, that takes a level of maturity on your part to ask somebody that and then be prepared if the response is, "Nah, I don't want to talk about it."
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
hard.
It is hard, and it can. I'll be honest. It can feel like rejection. Um,
Sure.
and I think that's an important balance too. That you are putting out vulnerability by asking that question and trying to engage in the curiosity. But you also can, perhaps should, I hate to should,
Yeah.
but you perhaps can respect the fact that they're not in a place where they can have that conversation with you right now. And like any good donor, right? Maybe it's not a no forever, maybe it's a no for right now. And so that I think is an important part to remember as well, that, meeting people where they're at means that you also accept them as how and who they're showing up in that moment.
And as you're working with these leaders, are they able to understand, digest, and then act in a manner like you just described? It's interesting. What's the is it doable? Maybe that's the question to ask for
This
folks.
is
And I
where I
know it's
say
not
it
an
depends
overnight,
again.
but it's a
Yeah, I liken it to a practice, right?
good.
It's well known. I'm a yogi. I practice
Yes.
yoga and meditation quite a bit, in large part because of my family dynamics. That's another story for another podcast.
For all of us.
But I liken it to a practice, right? So
Like
even
that.
though I have done what I consider a significant amount of work in kind of self-awareness and self-assessment and empathy and vulnerability, I still have my moments where I'm just not in a place to really receive, or not in a place to be in curiosity and to practice non-judgment. And so I have to remember to come back to the practice when I am in a place, or when I am in a more amenable place. So yes, it is doable. Yes, it is a practice. It is a habit. It's not an easy habit to form. And like any habit, it requires repetition. And part of what I often say to potential or current clients is, it's my job to help you build the muscles that you need when I've left, so that you can continue the great work that you do. And so part of that again comes from it's a nice little 80s movie shout out, but the movie What About Bob, right? He talks about baby steps to the boat, baby steps to the door. And sometimes it's just the next right step for you to get to that point of your level of self-actualization and kind of reaching those goals.
And this is so important because as leadership today is transitioning away from the command and control of the past, now it's really pulling people towards you, right, and leading from behind. You really need to be conscientious about this and understand and take a vested interest in understanding this model with your employees if you're going to get the best or most out of them over the long term. I mean, we can yell for a little bit, but that's not going to drive people to follow you over the long term.
Right, right. Well, and the more research that comes out from the generational studies and of motivation for workers and volunteers and staffers, it is more so, how do we meet folks where they're at, but also how do we assess where they're at in a way that is acknowledging our own biases, our own preferences. I mean, I have a 13-year-old. There are oftentimes I wish I could say, just do what I said, please and thank you. But people don't work like that. Clients don't work like that, and staffers and other volunteers don't work like that either. And so I think that's an important piece to lean in to understand what motivates that person to be where they're at. What do they want to accomplish by the time they leave service in that way? And then how can I help support you in getting you there? And it's not easy, believe me. Sometimes I wish I could just say, please just do what I said. And even as a consultant, that doesn't always happen, right? So it's also about, here's the advice that I've provided based on the assessment and the work that we've done. It's up to you to implement it. I can create systems for you, but at the end of the day, it is your choice. And so
Yeah,
that concept is important.
I think that really is. And so if I'm a board member and we're interviewing for a new CEO, can you identify people that have these traits and skill sets already?
Mm.
I just
Yes.
put you on the spot. I don't know the answer. I just wonder, how do you know if somebody has that empathy gene, the
Mm.
transparency gene, the I really do care about my employees gene, you want to meet them there gene?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can. I think like any interview process, you get the best of whomever on
Yeah.
display. And so a lot of that also is being very upfront as the organization about, here's what we expect or hope from the ideal candidate. The ideal candidate has a large understanding of emotional literacy. They've worked with teams from multi generations. They can share with us at the level of their comfort, maybe where they misstepped and what they did to course correct.
Interesting. That's a good question to ask, I would imagine, in
Yeah.
the interview process. Yeah.
Yeah.
So as you're looking in 2025, your consulting business, what are you focusing on? Tell the audience what interests you this year. What kind of projects, engagements are you looking towards?
That's a great question. Part of what I was able to establish last year was I went on sabbatical. And so
Yes.
kind of stop to go fast, right? Like I'm going to stop now to go fast. But for me, for this year, it's really focusing on the coaching side of the business, expanding and supporting both board staff leaders through coaching and facilitation. I'm still doing strategic planning with nonprofit organizations and small businesses. I'm really enjoying that. Looking to branch out into the corporate market for that as well. But I love bringing teams together. I love helping people connect. So I have a number of engagements coming up, whether they're trainings or workshops or conference breakouts that I always get excited about. Just again, how do we bring people into the room and build containers so that when they leave, at the end of the time, I'm just a facilitator of that. It's them and their relationships as they take it forward and what they're going to do with it. So yeah, so strategic planning, coaching, facilitation, and training. It continues to be my primary three, but I'm really excited about that. I'm also really excited to be finishing up another book that I'm going to be publishing as well, which is Managing Courageously, which is a co-authored book. It's about managing from the middle office. So it's an interesting one when you get to manage up, down, and everywhere in between. And we have a lot of implementation support for that as well. So really excited about publishing that.
Oh, I look forward to that coming out. Now, something you glossed over, you mentioned even corporate clients, and I share people who are listening, this whole idea of leading from behind, servant leadership, transparency, authenticity, it's not exclusive to the nonprofit space. And I would argue it's a little more challenging in the for-profit space, and you really need to have some leadership chops to operate in that manner. So Liz is available to, I know you want to work with corporate clients as well, because it doesn't matter, right?
Well,
Leadership's
I mean,
leadership.
it does and it doesn't, right? I think it's always important to know when we are doing, a nonprofit facilitation, that there's a very specific mission that often isn't profit based or often isn't shareholder focused. And there's also the important piece of so much blurring of the lines, I think, between corporate and for profit and public sector and nonprofit and all of those pieces. So many folks, particularly staff these days, want to make sure that they're at an organization that cares about them, that is doing more good in the world than harm, that is certainly compensating them. But then the board side of the house is always, you could literally do anything else with your time and energy. So you're here for a reason. Let's identify that reason if we don't already know. Let's talk about what your purpose or your hope for your legacy is. And then let's see if we can marry the two between, here's what our goals and missions are for the year or years ahead, and then here's how you want to contribute, and let's see if we can pair those together.
Oh, you're so articulate and eloquent with your words, and I appreciate that. So, Liz, how can the audience learn more about you and even maybe reach out to you if they're interested in talking to you?
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, I will say with love and appreciation that my website is currently going through some zhuzhing behind the scenes. So I always encourage people to reach out to me via LinkedIn. I'm typically really easy to get a hold of that way. I also love seeing who we are mutually connected with. I think it's no longer the 6 degrees of separation, or maybe like two. So I think that's always a great opportunity. So LinkedIn is definitely the best way. And then once we get connected and are in a working relationship, it's Slack, it's email, it's text, it's phone, it's regular meetings. It's a different kind of environment. But yeah, always LinkedIn first. Currently, my email address is an abyss, so I don't want to send anyone there.
Too good. I appreciate somebody honest about their website, because any other consultant out there will tell you, we will all tell you, there's nothing worse than trying to develop a website.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I'm a few years overdue. As you get in the hustle and you get that muscle going, and you're like, oh, I guess I need to do that website thing.
Yeah.
And honestly, nonprofits do it, does it. I'll date myself here, but I remember when websites first came out, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna look at all the websites, and they were all very different. How we use websites as users now has changed so much too. So we're even contemplating AI. I mean, again, it makes my head explode a little bit.
Yeah.
So I've got to be ready. And as we say, I'm not there yet. So.
Yeah. Too good. Well, Liz Wooten, ladies and gentlemen, you can reach her on LinkedIn. A friend of mine is a stellar consultant in our space. Liz, I can't thank you enough for coming on to the podcast today.
Absolutely. My honor and my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Here we go. Recapping with Reed. Reed, Liz gave us a wealth of information. What were your top 3 takeaways?
My first takeaway is kind of regarding leadership post-disaster, especially in Florida. Right now, a lot of organizations are dealing with that time after the hurricanes. And just thinking, have you now had time to even consider a strategic plan or get back on track with your existing strategic plan?
There we go. Number 2.
Co-op-itition. And she said 2 new words to me, co-op-itition and heart's work. So she said that at the heart of co-op-itition is acknowledging that you are not the only organization in town. This is a nonprofit. Very rarely will you be able to solve your mission by yourself. So there is going to be some cooperation involved with your competition.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Very normal in the space. And number 3.
And number 3 is heart work. And it's that soft skills are the most necessary when it comes to mission work, nonprofit related work, being a leader in an organization like that.
Yeah, you'd like to think everybody's got the hard skills. That's what got them to the level of leadership. It's the soft skills that then take over, and so critically important. So there you have it. Recapping with Reed, his 3 takeaways from our interview with Liz Wooten. And you know it, we will I-501 see you next week.